What skills or strategies would you encourage them to use, particularly if they have OCD along that process?
I think if you have OCD, your therapist, your support people, and your medical teams.
How does OCD manifest in the lead up to delivery?
I think similar to trying to conceive and what we discussed about fear of miscarriages, I think the same thing can come up for delivery, right?
How might you encourage them to talk to people, even their doctor, and share the fact that they're really struggling? How would you encourage them to address that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if it's, wait, I have a lot of these scary thoughts and
Pregnancy is full of uncertainty, but for folks with OCD, it can be incredibly uncomfortable and distressing. In this episode, we explore how OCD shows up across the 4 major stages of the perinatal experience. First at conception, then we have miscarriage fears, delivery, and then postpartum. We're also going to offer evidence-based support, including ERP, with lots of compassion along the way. Today, we have Erin Jones. She is a PMHC, and she's going to share with us what that means. And we're here to talk about all of the concerns that you may be having during this very, very vulnerable stage. So thank you for being here, Erin.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
So what is a PMHC?
Yeah, well, first, I'm a licensed counselor, but I also have the PMHC through Postpartum Support International, which is a perinatal mental health certificate. So that means that I've done some extra training and have experience with the perinatal population.
Yeah, amazing, which just makes you so perfect for this conversation. So let's get straight to it. So the stage 1 is conception. This is, again, the very beginning. So what kind of OCD thoughts and compulsions do people commonly experience when trying to conceive?
I'm so glad we're talking about this for all of it, of course, but I also feel like when we talk about pregnancy and postpartum, we're also missing the fact that OCD and anxiety can unfortunately tackle things way before the pregnancy even happens. Right? So when people are trying for a baby, of course, there's a ton of uncertainty and not much we have control over. So OCD loves to latch on to that. I think when people are trying to conceive, there tends to be a lot of what if worries about things like, what if there's a problem? What if I can't get pregnant? And I think these things can be common for everybody. But we start to see more OCD when the fears, I think, come up as more of just right urges. Like if I don't do things a certain way, then maybe I won't get pregnant. And that could seem logical or illogical, right?
Yeah.
It could be like, if I don't set up my day in a certain way, then these results won't happen. I think we could also see a lot of what we call magical thinking.
Yeah.
Right? So like if I have this intrusive thought, then that means this bad outcome will happen. Or if I don't do this thing or I think about this one thing, then this outcome is going to happen or not.
Yes.
I think also with trying to conceive, OCD can really latch on to that. Just it cause this increased sense of personal responsibility. So what I mean by that is like, what if I don't do things in just the right way? Or if I don't listen to these obsessions and urges, then it won't happen, or maybe there will be a problem. So I feel like it just takes a lot of the pretty normal or common worries of trying to conceive and just amplifies it even more.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, it's so hard. It's so hard right on. Again, I think people often feel too like sad because they're like, it's supposed to be a joyful experience. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be exciting, but it's like, it can be so anxiety provoking and take all of the fun out of it and just make it into this very serious, scary process.
Yeah, it's definitely okay if it doesn't always feel fun. I'm a mom of 2, but before that I had unexplained infertility, which is probably like the worst possible term for OCD and anxiety to latch onto. And unfortunately, eventually I was able to get pregnant and have 2 kids now. But I know for a lot of people in that position, especially with anxiety, there's even more of a mystery because you don't know what's going on. And I think it can lead to a lot of compulsive behaviors that could still be like ordinary things in trying to conceive. So like taking pregnancy tests, taking ovulation tests, tracking things in your body. If you just said those things on their own, they're, things that one might do in that process. But I think with anxiety or OCD, that can just be amplified a lot. So just really like ruminating, compulsively thinking about the whole trying to conceive process, compulsively taking ovulation or pregnancy tests. I think also like symptom spotting or being really hyper vigilant to symptoms in your body, which bodies can fluctuate so much anyway. But I know that that can be a really common compulsion for people in that time too.
Yeah.
Like, everybody says, just have fun and it'll happen. And
Not that easy.
yeah, and I don't want anyone to feel guilty if they're also like not having fun with that
Yeah.
all the time because it could be hard. And then you think, oh, great, now I'm doing something wrong because I'm not
Yeah.
having fun all the
And especially if you've had a miscarriage, I think it amplifies too, which I know we're about to talk about. But so let's use that as a segue. Miscarriage is deeply painful for so many people. How does OCD amplify that fear, and what might it look like in the day to day for someone struggling with this particular anxiety and fear?
Absolutely. I know it's such a deep fear, and I think yeah, once one does conceive, I think many people do know that the chance of miscarriage is higher, especially in the first trimester. When you know that something is a possibility, and again that you can't do much to control whether it happens or not, OCD and anxiety do not like that.
Yeah.
And then of course, if you don't want that to happen, your mind might try to think of extra ways that you can try to not make that happen.
Yeah.
So again, I think kind of similar to how one might experience this in the process of trying to conceive, when there are fears of miscarriage, OCD can amplify it by saying like, now it's your responsibility to make sure that this doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So you need to pay attention to your body, check things all the time. Again, I think it could lead to maybe some just right urges or magical thinking urges. For example, if I don't eat right in the whole day or do my routine a certain way, then could that cause a miscarriage?
Yeah.
So I think OCD really tends to really push to that personal responsibility aspect of things again. Like what if, where it's the worry isn't only what if a miscarriage happens, because of course that would be awful and could happen anyway, but it's what if you have a miscarriage and it's because you did something.
Yeah. Or you didn't do
it.
something. Yeah. I remember when I was pregnant with my daughter, and for some reason I decided, which was ridiculous, I look back, but I decided I was going to mow the lawn. And it's not something I would typically normally do. And you know how like a lawnmower vibrates as you push it? Oh, I don't know if you have ever like pushed a lawnmower, but it vibrates. And then I experienced a lot of like cramping after that. And I'm sure it was because of the vibration, and it was exhausting, and it was hot outside. It was a stupid thing for me to like assume that I should do in that moment, but I was like, it's fine. And I was feeling like, I think that an energy of, yeah. So, but, and I remember from that moment feeling those cramps, being hyper vigilant to any cramping. And like no matter what little move my body made, twinge, itch, everything felt like this is it happening. And then you become catastrophic and you might go into doing some compulsive behaviors. And I've heard a lot of clients talk about that. Just being hyper aware of every sensation, thinking, is this the miscarriage coming, is so terrifying.
Yeah.
So I think that it's true that it's if you have OCD, you might even go above and beyond that hypervigilance to being hyper aware of your body, constantly checking your body, asking for reassurance. Now we have ChatGPT, asking ChatGPT, is it a normal symptom of miscarriage and so forth. So do you have any sort of thoughts on that you wanted to add on what might be going on for folks with what kind of behaviors they do when they are having that fear?
Absolutely. And I can relate to just having like, I don't know, the sudden urge and adrenaline rush to do something in general, but also while pregnant, then yeah, just that bodies fluctuate so much during that time.
Yeah.
And even trying to conceive while pregnant throughout the whole period of time. And then I think I also want to add that this can be heightened for people who have experienced a miscarriage already, who have been through that trauma, right? And, people who may experience health anxiety, things like that, where you're feeling real things in your body, but then your brain is just amplifying it to, okay, now something's wrong. Something's wrong. That's it. It's happening.
Yeah. What advice might you give to someone who is pregnant or trying to conceive? What skills or strategies would you encourage them to use, particularly if they have OCD along that process?
I think if you have OCD, I think you definitely want to work with, your therapist, your support people, and your medical teams, whether that's your OB, if you're informing them that you're trying to conceive, because really, if you feel that you could be prone to this, and it's just good for people to be aware that we'll get to pregnancy soon, but perinatal OCD is about 1.5 to 2 times as common than OCD in the general population. So, it's not something that we have to live in fear of if we want to get pregnant and have babies, but just to know, hey, I already have OCD. I could be more prone to anxiety during this time. But I think ultimately you want to work on, depending how you're going to go about trying for a baby, right? Some people don't want to track things or, use all the tests and everything other people do. So I think just knowing what your game plan is going to be for that. If it's okay, I'm going to test for ovulation or use a pregnancy test at this period of time, have those support people in your life where you can keep those tasks to, just kind of, I would say within normal limits. I don't
Yeah.
like the word normal, but if it's okay, I'm going to test for ovulation and try for the baby and to see how it goes and have this period of time where I know I'm going to be more embracing of the uncertainty of how my body's feeling
Yeah.
versus like I'm going to keep it to myself and just think about it all day. I think that will help a lot.
Yeah.
So basically, kind of like when there's a medical condition, you want to know what your general game plan is. And then anything outside of that
Yeah.
is extra.
Yep.
Because I imagine that people are still going to be living their daily lives while they're trying for a baby. And it's trying to conceive doesn't have to be your new 50-hour a week full time.
Yeah.
You're thinking about all the time.
And I like what you said, because what we're really looking at here is determining what would be within your normal, not normal in general, but your normal, and then what you would determine as compulsive based on your values, right? Like we talk a lot about that in your OCD toolkit of getting clear of like, yes, anyone without OCD would maybe check their hormone levels or the pregnancy test, or maybe with the Doppler, what is the thing that where you're like you can have at home ones. So determining what would I do if I didn't have OCD and using that as your limits instead of as soon as you feel any anxiety, just going in and doing those compulsive behaviors, I think is helpful. And I think, again, speaking with your partner on what they think is comfortable as well and what we agree would be like a non-compulsive approach, I think is important. However, I do know that for folks with anxiety, especially with OCD, it's so hard when you already love that babe so much and it's in your belly. It's so hard to resist doing those compulsions. What might you encourage them to be doing to help reduce that compulsion? Like, how would you encourage them to manage those moments?
Especially if somebody's already pregnant,
Yeah.
avoiding those compulsions.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think even if you can put as little of a time delay on it as possible, start with that, right?
Yeah.
If it's too hard to not do the compulsions. So maybe there can be this alternative. Yeah, I love this baby so much. And eh, this mix up of like my compulsions feel like a way to exercise that responsibility and show the baby that I love them.
Yeah.
Maybe I can like put my hands on my belly and talk to the baby, or okay, can I go do something else and wait a little bit? Maybe then I'll check with the heart rate monitor again,
Yeah.
tonight. Of course, you would know if something is really feeling like an emergency and you
Yeah.
need medical care. Yeah, I would say have your couple of people you can check in with. If there's another pregnant friend, therapist, your partner, you can say, "Oh, I just keep feeling like I want to check."
Yeah.
And this person would have been briefed on this already, so they would know to say, "No, it's so hard," and you just feel like you have to do it right then, like that urgency. But yeah, again, I would say try to see if you can wait a little bit first, however many seconds or minutes you need to start with.
Yeah.
And you can talk to your baby for a little bit.
Yeah, I like that you said that, because I think in OCD treatment, of course, we're always putting an emphasis on being uncertain and tolerating that discomfort. But sometimes I think it means that we have to just be miserable, right? Or just sit in that miserable, horrible uncertainty. But I love how you're bringing in, like, still talk to your baby, like put your attention on the positive experience you're having or what you're doing in that moment or what does line up with your values, which I think is so important, because it's so hard to focus when you have that anxiety and that hyper responsibility for this thing you love so much that you didn't know you could love so much.
Yeah.
It's so painful.
It's always, I mean, even for folks who aren't pregnant, but I feel like it can be so heightened when I keep mentioning this greater sense of personal responsibility, but that's already there when you're pregnant because you are growing a baby in your belly that, you do have some more responsibility for, just not in the way that OCD says that you do.
Yeah.
So it is really hard to wait. So I think it's easy to hear concepts like, oh, well, okay, wait 5 minutes or keep delaying and see how that goes. But yeah, the most common question is, so then what do? I just sit there and be really upset? might be tough, but you could still do stuff during that time while you're feeling anxious.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move to stage 3, which is really delivery. So, how does OCD manifest in the lead up to delivery? So, what type of intrusive thoughts or compulsions might tend to arise during that stage of this beautiful but very, uncertain process?
Yeah, more uncertainty, right, in your
Yeah.
voice.
Yeah.
I think similar to trying to conceive and what we discussed about fear of miscarriages, I think the same thing can come up for delivery, right? I think more of the common worries that anyone could experience would be more of just the what ifs, right? I have knowledge of all these things that could happen, or what if my birth plan doesn't go the way that I planned for it to go? Any kind of what if, right? What if some harm comes to me or the baby? What if it just doesn't go the way I wanted it to? And I think, of course, many could think about that anyway, but OCD tends to take that and amp it up more. It adds to the frequency and duration of the worry.
Yeah.
Right. So if people are listening and it's like, but I do worry about that. Yeah, I think anyone can in this stage. But if it's something that you're thinking about all the time, every day, it's keeping you from doing things you want to do. A lot of your day becomes more of these compulsive behaviors, like researching things online, asking people for reassurance, especially repeatedly, maybe like over editing the birth plan for every possible outcome. These could be things that, start to get more excessive and time consuming. And that's where OCD might tend to come in the most.
Yeah. And I've also had a lot of clients who have had, we have intrusive thoughts. We know that's a common obsession for folks with OCD. I've had a lot of pregnant moms talk about these intrusive images, like images of them tearing, like very, very graphic images of them tearing. And that's just very repetitive and unwanted of these images and they'll feel the pain of that tearing, but it hasn't even happened yet. Or the fear that they won't love their baby or that they won't attach well to their baby. And that this is like this ongoing repetitive fear of, or, more like you said, the general, like, what if, pedophilia obsessions and harm obsessions. So I think that there are so many ways beyond just normal perinatal anxiety. With OCD, it tends to be very repetitive and in your face. Would you agree?
Yes. And I think some of the examples you gave, a thought like, what if I don't love my baby? Pedophilia thoughts. What if I have this like sexual thought about the baby and there's something wrong with me? Or you do have the thought and you wonder what that means, this intrusive thought.
Yeah.
It's just a thought, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, this is where it is more like OCD compared to general anxiety and thinking about the what ifs.
Yes.
And we need to normalize that more because those intrusive thoughts, however taboo, can happen to pregnant people and their partners anyway.
Yeah.
It's more like you said, if we keep latching onto it, we do compulsions, they feel really sticky. That's when they tend to become more like OCD.
Yeah, absolutely. Postpartum, the stage 4, is such a vulnerable time. We're exhausted, we're sleep deprived, we may or may not have like relational struggles because everyone's tired and exhausted and learning something that they've never done before. Can you walk us through how OCD might look in that postpartum stage, especially when it comes to those harm-related and sexual-related obsessions?
Yeah, I think when we hear postpartum OCD, I think really any theme of OCD could come up during this time, but I think the most common tend to be harm obsessions, maybe contamination obsessions.
Yeah.
And this can come together as well, right? Like, what if the baby becomes sick or contaminated and I've harmed them in that way, or because I didn't do something? So yeah, harm being it could be images, like you said, just horrible images of the baby getting hurt, them being dropped. What if I do something or I neglect to do something and then that hurts the baby? And contamination, what if the baby gets sick? But it could even stem into more kind of superstitious or just right thoughts. Like, what if I don't do everything in just this, or what my mind says is just this right way, and then something bad happens?
Yeah.
More taboo thoughts, right? Wait, I had this sexual thought about my baby. Is there something wrong with me? Am I attracted to them, right? What does this mean? I think also, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of people can have relationship OCD during the postpartum period. What if I don't love my baby? Kind of like the feelings check. Like, do I feel right? Am I feeling the right way? Yeah. So it can go quite a bit beyond like maybe harm or contamination, which we might think of initially.
Right.
And this can include so many compulsions, right? It could be ruminating, meaning just thinking or attempting to think through these thoughts a lot. If I have this thought about harm, now I'm going to go through this like mental list in my brain of trying
Right.
to prove to myself whether or not it's going to happen. It can make you want to avoid the baby, right?
Yep.
If being around the
Yep.
baby gives you those thoughts, maybe this means something about me. Maybe I shouldn't give the baby baths or change their diapers.
Yeah.
I might have these scary thoughts or do something that my mind is afraid of me doing.
Yeah.
A lot of checking, reassurance seeking. So there
Yeah.
can really be any OCD theme or compulsion during this time. Because then sometimes people have or they have the onset of OCD during pregnancy or postpartum, and their obsessions aren't really surrounding the baby. And they hear about it, but then they think, "Wait, now I feel guilty because my obsessions aren't about the I've met a lot of people who have that
What
too.
does it mean
So
about me, right?
right. Now,
Yeah.
is there something wrong that my obsessions are not about the
Yeah.
baby? So I think, yeah, harm and contamination are probably the most common, but it's OCD during that time. So it can still really be about
Quite a few consultations of clinicians on moms who get OCD about the child's name, that they get really fixed on what if I've picked the wrong name and I've ruined my child's life.
yeah.
Or during the delivery, I've had a couple of clients report something would happen. Maybe it's that a certain flower delivery came, or they requested a certain pillow or blanket. And let's say as the flowers arrive, they had the thought that these flowers are going to taint this whole delivery or this whole
Yes.
thing. And so it's, even though they're like, I know it didn't taint it postpartum, they can't stop thinking about, but how will I know if it did or not? And then we get so stuck on that, which I think is, it can be so easily complicated by one. Like clients will say, it's so silly. Like, why did it pick the flower arrangement? But it did. And so I think that's where I'm loving that we're talking about it, because like getting married, delivering a baby is a pretty big life stage.
Pretty big.
Pretty huge, right? And that's why I think OCD attacks it, because it is such a big part of your life. It's such
Yes.
a monumental moment in your lifetime.
The hormone changes, but that's also why partners can experience this too, like adoptive parents. So,
Yes.
because they experience hormonal changes too, but just all these changes in environment. And I'm glad you brought up the example with the flowers too, because I think that would often get labeled as something called emotional contamination, where it's like my day is going to be contaminated, or even like me as a person or my spirit or like my weekend or the baby's life will be contaminated. So like you said, it doesn't always make sense,
Right.
it can seem illogical, and we don't always know why it picks those things, just besides the fact that it's an outcome that we can't control.
Yes.
And I don't think you would see as much like emotional contamination like that if you looked up common obsessions that happen really at all, but also during the postpartum period. So it's a really helpful example.
It's such a grief process for folks with OCD in these stages too, because it's like, they're like, why did OCD take this beautiful moment from me, this experience? I have sat with so many people just to process that grief that they feel.
Yeah.
It's so hard. And it's such a bummer, like, that OCD takes this from people, right? It like makes me want to cry, because it's just not fair. But it can really take over and run the whole show.
Yeah, it's not fair. And I feel for anybody who's had to go through that. And especially if that's the first time that you're really experiencing an intrusive thought. And that's why I want to talk about it, so that people, I mean, it can help a lot of folks to just know, like, okay, you could have some taboo or violent or strange or sexual intrusive thoughts during this time. And it's just a thought. Your nervous system is, just warning you about all these things.
Yes.
Just knowing that can help
Yes.
so much of like, okay, there's nothing wrong with me.
Yeah. You touched on the next question I was going to ask, which is the stigma and the shame. So many people feel this intense shame around their OCD, their intrusive thoughts. What would you just say to somebody who feels shame for their intrusive thoughts, or for the fact that their compulsions have taken up a lot of time, that it's interfered with their process of delivering this baby into the world?
Yeah, I would encourage people to approach it with some self-compassion, like you just said earlier. It's not fair.
No.
It does suck, but we're still people.
Yeah.
People who deal with OCD, and it doesn't have to do with who you are as a parent. You are not your thoughts. This doesn't mean you're a bad mom or a bad parent. parent, you've struggled during parenthood or early parenthood. If anything, what really defines OCD is that your obsessions are ego dystonic, meaning they're opposite of your worldview. You don't want these things to happen. So I would encourage people to really be compassionate with themselves, again, see themselves as a human, while also just validating that it sucks and it's sad that you have to go through this.
Yeah, and get support. Reach out. There are so many moms online with OCD who are willing to share their experience. There's actually a whole community of, I think, moms out there with postpartum OCD or perinatal OCD who would be willing to support them and encourage them during this, or what was already a very painful, uncomfortable time, very uncertain time. Absolutely. Yeah.
I know with the IOCDF, some of us there's a SIG, a special interest group called Moms with OCD.
Yes.
And we mainly meet more, it's not a support group. We meet more but to connect and advocate, educate people. We do awareness week type stuff. And my colleague and I, if maybe you can plug in our blurb for this, but I run a monthly support group for moms with OCD with my friend Megan.
Where would they go to learn about that?
You can find it on, probably the easiest place would be through Instagram. My Instagram is Erin Talks OCD. Message me through there, or my colleague in the community, Megan Davis, runs it with me.
Great.
And her website is megandavispsychotherapy.com.
Okay. Cool. We'll add those in the show notes, and that's awesome. That's the support people need.
Yes, it's definitely out there. There's and so many moms, and really what I tend to hear the most is just, oh, it's so good that somebody talked about this, or I just heard somebody else say a thought that they had, and that was just so helpful to me. Yeah, you're like, okay, it wasn't just me. Like, people have this. And I think that really helps with the shame too.
For real. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's talk about treatment.
Yes.
Okay. What is the treatment for folks who have any type of OCD that's affecting them in any of these 4 stages? Is it the same treatment? Does it change? Would we modify it? What are your thoughts?
Generally, it's still the same. It's still ERP, exposure and response prevention, that gold standard treatment. So really generally, again, OCD during whether trying to conceive or the perinatal postpartum period, people can have OCD fears surrounding their kids way past the postpartum period anyway. Yep. We still want to use exposure and response prevention, of course, because we use those skills to, embrace move into our intrusive thoughts and things that trigger us and delay or ultimately not do the compulsion. So it's still the same in that sense. But I think there are definitely ways that we have to consider the perinatal and postpartum population. So, I think due to stigma and maybe misinformation, ERP can have a rep for being, people wonder if it's unethical or harmful. And it's not. Especially when a provider is trained and doing values-based exposures. So, for example, a lot of people would wonder, like, well, if I'm facing my fears, is the baby going to get hurt? Am I going to do something that could hurt the baby in my belly? And the answer is no, we're not going to hurt your baby because we don't want to do that. Because we're like nice people and we also don't want that to happen to you. But we might do things that OCD says are risky.
Yeah.
But aren't against medical guidelines, right? So maybe you'd hold your baby or prep food for yourself in pregnancy without doing all these excess like cleaning compulsions. Yeah. But we're not going to have you do things like when the baby's born, they're against safe sleep guidelines. So we may work with OBs or medical providers, or of course just work with our clients and say, hey, like what are your goals here that you want to get towards? What are your values? And then how can we challenge that in a way that's still challenging, but ethical and safe? And then of course, as pregnancy progresses and the baby is born and somebody's very new postpartum, we still do ERP, but it's kind of like getting back into exercising. We're obviously going to modify things. Yes. How gradually we get into it. But I think a lot of people think that they can't do ERP because the baby's young, but if anything, it's a much better time to do it.
For real.
Just, might have to take our time a little bit. Not a baby.
Well, and I think too, a lot of the exposure and response prevention, even if it's not exposure heavy, we're going to be focusing on response prevention as a huge piece of the work. Like, can we work at reducing your reassurance seeking? Can we work at reducing mental compulsions or avoidant compulsions? Yeah. And like you said, OCD is going to have some strong words to say and try to like get you back into doing those compulsions. But I think it's such a beautiful opportunity to empower moms to get really clear on how they want to parent and how they want to show up and not let fear win. Fear can literally destroy us. The one thing I would add too is how I know for me, if I haven't slept, my anxiety is always so much worse. Always so much worse. And that was a huge part of the anxiety of having a kid for me, was I was more afraid of not sleeping than I was any other fear.
Yeah.
And I would obsess. I'd like, come 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'd start to obsess over, will I get sleep tonight? What will I do if I don't? Just because I feel so miserable if I hadn't slept. And I think that that's such a common fear for folks with
Yeah.
anxiety, especially when you actually aren't getting much sleep.
Yes. I'm so glad you brought that up because it's a really, really common fear in general.
Yeah.
Also with OCD, in and out of pregnancy, assessing about sleep, right? And then I think we know even outside of like the postpartum time, if you think too much about not sleeping, like you're going to be up not sleeping. And that just clarifies where it's just so important to have that support and really figure out what your as best you can, what your sleep plan's gonna be, what help do you have, how can you have some restful time in the day, even if it's, well, okay, I wanna feed the baby, my sleep is gonna be really short. Okay, but how do we take care of you and make it
Yeah.
work so that, maybe the highest quality sleep might not be absolutely guaranteed, but we can make sure that you get
Yeah.
what you need because, yes, losing sleep can impact your anxiety much more. But I also, like, even as I say that, I don't love my wording because, like, we shouldn't just assume that because you're late in pregnancy or postpartum that you're just not gonna sleep ever, and, like, that's not accurate. You still need to sleep.
Yeah.
So it's really important, and it's another way that I think moms and parents and partners have to make sure that
Yeah.
they're taking care of themselves too.
Yeah, yeah. I actually feel like having a baby forced exposure onto me to where I actually realized I could function without sleep. Right? Like if anything, the learning happened through delivering and being like, okay, this is not good. I'm free. Like I get teary and everything when I'm tired and more anxious. But then after a while, I was like, oh, I can actually do this. Like I have no choice, but I can. It's harder. But if I'm gentler with myself through the day and maybe don't put as many expectations, this is actually
Right.
tolerable. This is doable,
Right.
which was a really good lesson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I can relate, and I think just we can be anxious and do things, like, we can be
Yes.
okay, I can be tired and do things
Yeah.
too.
Yes. I think that a big part of the treatment too is having support. Like, just having someone who you can talk to, not from a form of reassurance or not just ruminating, but just having someone who can go, yeah, it makes total sense that you're sometimes with clients that disarms the OCD by just going, yeah, that's really scary. Like it makes total sense that you want to do compulsions. I know we're working against it, but if your brain was saying that, it makes sense that you would want to, avoid the baby and so forth. But then also educating them and empowering them that just because fear says to avoid doesn't mean you should avoid. I think that's a hard one with perinatal OCD, especially. Like that's where I know I've seen so many clients who've come because the mom just cannot even be in the room with her child.
Yeah.
But wants to.
Yes.
Desperate, not because they are a bad mom, desperately wants to, but he's just so afraid.
I think that's why a lot of ERP and exposures with this realm of OCD is it's primarily going to be those things that you're
Yeah.
avoiding. Like it could be day-to-day tasks, right?
Yeah.
That could just feel so much more difficult because of OCD. All right, bring the baby in. Let's change their diaper. Heck.
Yeah.
Have them bring them to the office, or we'll do virtual, and
Yeah.
you can move through that task. It's like we'll practice, being mindful and having
Yeah.
the thoughts. And so that's why, again, I feel like exposure therapy gets this rep for like doing these really overly intense things. And we might do some strong challenges, but like it might be, all right, let's hang out and play with the baby.
Yeah.
And then like, for me, it's like you can bring the baby to the office if you want to. Yeah, totally help with that. But let's do these day-to-day tasks that are like really difficult and scary. And like you said, learn to move through it being tired / nervous or scared.
Yeah. And they can be gradual too.
Yes.
So you could, let's say the first exposure might be that you're just in the room with somebody, another adult, and that's the first exposure. Maybe you're just witnessing them changing the diaper. Then maybe you change the diaper and the partner's in the room with you, or they do part of it, you do part of it. But you're slowly moving up that hierarchy of being able to do it on your own in a room by yourself where there's not another adult, or that, just to use that example. So I think it's okay if it takes a little bit of time and you're gradually working up that hierarchy because it
Yes.
often requires baby steps.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good pun.
Yeah, true. For those who are listening, maybe they're feeling totally overwhelmed by their thoughts. How might you encourage them to talk to people, even their doctor, and share the fact that they're really struggling? How would you encourage them to address that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if it's, wait, I have a lot of these scary thoughts and I don't want my thoughts or my worries to be misunderstood, or stigmatized in any way. I think it could be good whether it's a friend or a partner or your doctor to, but think of a simple sentence you can start with. So, yeah, I've been having a lot of extra worries and I could use some support. Start with that. If it's especially a doctor or a therapist, I would follow up with that by asking them what familiarity they
Yes.
have with OCD and intrusive thoughts, because knowing that the provider has some training or understanding in it is going to really help you see them as somebody to trust with that and know that you don't actually want these things to happen and that you're not actually a threat to your baby.
Yeah. I often tell clients too, like if you find an article online that
Yeah.
somewhat explains your symptom, print it out. And even if you cannot mutter the words, because sometimes even people with OCD are avoiding even the words, just print it out and push it across the table and say, could you read that? This is very similar to what I'm experiencing. Sometimes it's easier just to come from
Yeah.
a well-known website that, can help explain the situation.
Yes.
Um,
Or I heard this explanation on this podcast episode about flowers getting delivered and it really resonated with me. Please listen to this clip. Like, that's such a great suggestion.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That I experienced that and be able to share with
Mhm.
family too.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, this is so amazing. I have one more question. So, you've worked with a lot of women. You're obviously very skilled in this area through all of these stages, right? Can you share any last points, a main message of hope for those folks who are maybe coping with this?
Yeah, because before I answer that too, I also want to add one thing that I think we didn't get to touch on yet is that people might hear this and think like, oh, wait, I have OCD or I'm worried that this could happen. So maybe I shouldn't even have a baby. And so I just want people to know, like, make your decisions however you want to make them, of
Yeah,
course. But being prone to OCD or anxiety or the possibility that it could come up does not mean that you shouldn't have a child. Like use
percent.
the information and be prepared, but you're still capable of that. So then to that, I would add if you experience this again, it really has nothing to do with who you are as a person or a parent. There's so much more information and evidence based therapy available that you can take these tools. And maybe there's some anxiety there sometimes, but you can live a good, valuable life and
Yeah.
be a good parent.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because I have heard people say, I've been through it. I know what it's like to have OCD. I never want my child to have OCD,
Yeah.
or I don't want to be triggered, but like I have been in the past. And I know
Sure.
that you might get triggered again. And I'm so grateful that you brought that up. Thank you. And I think the good news is this is a highly treatable condition.
Yes.
Right. So it may mean that you need to go through another round of treatment. But even then, I always say to my clients who are afraid, they've often said, like, what if my OCD comes back when I have a baby? And I'm like, you'll call me
Yeah.
and we know it works. So we'll just keep doing what you've done and we'll play that one. We'll worry about that when it
Yeah.
happens. But still, that we have this good plan and this good treatment goal.
It's scary that it could show up and you're like with your client, it's like, okay, now, yeah, we'll know what to do.
Yeah. I said we've got like this roadmap that's already worked once.
Yeah.
We can
Excited.
practice it again. Yeah. And with support, and maybe it takes a little longer. And I think that's really important. Is there any other thing that you feel like we've missed talking about? Or is there a main message you maybe even wanted to repeat for the folks listening who are struggling with this?
I think again, just that this is so common and
Mm.
that there's, like you said, there's so much support. It doesn't have to do with who you are as a person or a
Yeah.
parent. Yeah, I want people to feel more informed and also have hope from this, that it doesn't have to take over your life, although it can really feel like that
Yeah,
in the
for
moment.
sure.
So much support out there, whether it's through resources like this, International OCD Foundation, and Postpartum Support International.
Yeah. And that it doesn't mean you're a bad mom or a bad dad.
It doesn't.
Right? No, it doesn't. Like, I think when you have these intrusive thoughts, it can make you feel like there's something inherently wrong with you as a parent. Like, maybe I just wasn't cut out for this. But I have found that my clients with OCD are the most incredible parents, right?
Yeah.
They're just amazing and would do anything for their child. It just, yeah, again, sometimes the brain steps in and makes it a little messy.
Having OCD does not disqualify someone for being a parent.
Yes. Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here.
So glad to be here.
Tell us where people can hear about you and the work that you're doing, or maybe even get in contact with you for therapy.
Absolutely. So I work with a group called Bull City Anxiety in North Carolina. So the website is bullcityanxiety.com. And I have an Instagram that I use mainly for, therapy related things. It's Erin Talks OCD.
Amazing. I'm so grateful you're here.
Thank you for having me.